If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, and it can be heard on Spotify, Apple, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Now download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. That is ANCHOR.FM.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. J. Robert Oppenheimer, a physicist, quoted the Bhagavad Gita to describe the newly developed atomic bomb that held the potential to end all human life. The Manhattan Project was a research and development undertaking in the United States during World War II that produced the first nuclear weapons. From 1939 until 1946, scientists worked in response to fears that German scientists had been working on a weapon using nuclear technology since the 1930s, and that Adolf Hitler was prepared to use it. The project led to a new age of intimidation, threats, and Cold War. The Manhattan Project has made us question the morality of weaponry and mass bloodshed. Meanwhile, we've been sheltered from a more dangerous and barbaric undertaking. This is the Dugway Proving Ground. Welcome to Crime and Cryptic, where we investigate criminals, cover-ups, and all things covert. I'm your host, Haley, and today we're going to take a deep dive inside the US government's top-secret bioweapons lab that holds more mystery than Area 51 itself. Let's get into it. The Dugway Proving Ground was established in 1942, shortly after the U.S. was suddenly drawn into World War II, following the attack on Pearl Harbor. This facility lies in a barren region of Utah, only about 80 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. The Great Salt Lake Desert was an excellent location for this project. This Lewiston was ideal, being remote, thinly populated, and easy to secure. The facility spans 800,000 acres across this barren landscape, leaving plentiful room for weapons testing, biological study, and large-scale destruction. The first project undertaken at the Dugway Proving Ground saw the alarming launch of Operation Big Itch, an experiment that was testing weaponized fleas. The fleas weren't infected with any additional disease or agent, but experimenters were working with thousands of them. The fleas were dropped in cluster bombs to gauge if they would survive the fall from an airplane. The tests were designed to determine coverage patterns and survivability of the tropical rat flea for use in biological warfare as a disease vector. The fleas were loaded into two types of munitions, the E-14 and E-23 bombs, and dropped from the air. The E-14 was designed to hold 100,000 fleas, and the E-23 was designed to hold 200,000 fleas, but the E-23 failed in over half of the Big Itch tests. E-23s malfunctioned during testing, and fleas were released into the air, where they bit the pilot, bombardier, and an observer. Now, the Department of Defense spends its money in some odd ways, but imagine that workers' comp paperwork. And those poor guys couldn't tell anybody what had happened. Not that anyone would believe them. Setting off a flea bomb inside of a fighter jet sounds more like a meth trip, not a workday accident. Either way, OSHA can't fix that. As a result, the remaining Big Itch tests were conducted using only the smaller capacity E-14s. Guinea pigs were used as test subjects and placed around a 660-yard circular grid. I cannot make this up, you guys. The Department of Defense paid thousands of dollars to bomb guinea pigs with fleas to see if they'd bite. Big Itch proved successful, and the tests showed that not only could the fleas survive the drop from an airplane, but they could also soon attach themselves to hosts. This was only the start of their bioweapons testing. After the success of Big Itch, Dugway launched a second experiment called Project Bellwether in the 1960s. Only this time, mosquitoes were injected with inert diseases, inert bacteria, and inert viruses. But get this, these dangerous mosquitoes were released upon several groups of human volunteers who were bitten again and again during the trials. I'm pretty sure this project should have been called the Bigger Itch, but I digress. And there are records dating back to the late 1950s, which describes experiments that used infected mosquitoes. And those are just 2 experiments known to the public. Exactly what goes on at Dugway is, well, pretty unclear, and that's not by accident. The most infamous incident at Dugway is the dead sheep incident that graced headlines in the Northwest United States. In 1968, testing for a chemical weapon called VX got out of hand. Considering the test was done in the air with planes spitting out drops of nerve agent into the wind, the risks seemed pretty obvious in retrospect. This, of course, didn't stop military officials from initiating the test. VX, better known as sarin gas, is an extremely toxic synthetic chemical compound in the organophosphorus class, specifically a thiophosphate. It's been used in the class of nerve agents, and it was developed for military use in chemical warfare after the translation of earlier discoveries of organophosphate toxicity in pesticide research. Sarin is an extremely toxic, colorless, odorless gas that acts on the nervous system. It falls in the same category of substances as pesticides, also known as organophosphates. Even small amounts can cause death within minutes. Because sarin acts on the nervous system, it essentially disrupts all bodily functions. The pupils shrink to pinpoints, the mouth and lungs fill with saliva and bodily fluid, and the heart begins to slow. Blood pressure, responsible for keeping a healthy person lucid and conscious, decreases, and the victim loses consciousness. It's like drowning in your own blood, and it's a merciless way to kill. In 1968, the testing was interrupted by a significant off-post incident. State officials and veterinarians had been called to investigate reports of thousands of alleged dead sheep in Skull Valley, northeast of the Dugway Proving Ground, on March 14th. Many of those sheep were actually sick and unmoving, not dead, but resisting medications. No other animal or human had been infected, but suspicion fell on the military center that its testing might have something to do with the illnesses. The general public began to hear news about the sheep deaths on March 19th, causing the investigation to quickly escalate to the top levels of the Army and Utah state government. There had been 3 open-air nerve agent events on March 13th, one of which was a test involving an F-4 fighter operating 2 spray tanks, each holding 160 gallons of sarin gas. The dangerous chemical apparently got swept away amid strong gusts and blew into the nearby farmland in Skull Valley, which, with a name like that, seems tragically ironic. After a few days, between 4,000 and 6,000 sheep were dead. The military refused to accept blame for the incident, but still coughed up the money to compensate the angry farmers. You could argue that these sheep were among the few casualties of the Cold War. As more sheep sickened and died, spokesperson for the Dugway facility denied testing any weapons in the days before the massacre. But on March 21st, U.S. Senator Frank Moss released a Pentagon document that proved otherwise. On March 13th, the day before, Sheriff Gillette came across the scene. A high-speed jet had sprayed 320 gallons of nerve gas VX across the Dugway grounds in a weapons test. Despite the widespread coverage of the incident, locally and nationally, few people in the region expressed real alarm in the immediate aftermath. This was in part due to the fact that the military was the largest employer in the state. Concerned from the highest level of the state on down, this was too much investigating or talking about the incident that might make the Army move its base from Dugway. Although the Army never released a full, detailed report, they paid almost $400,000 to rancher Alvin Hatch, whose sheep accounted for 90% of those afflicted. The military also lent bulldozers for the mass burial of the dead sheep, and initiated a review of the safety protocol at Dugway. But even with the sheep buried and the settlements paid, the Army couldn't make the incident disappear. The deaths of the sheep were only the starting point of what became a years-long battle over chemical weapons in the context of the Cold War and American military action in Vietnam. It's all because Richard McCarthy, a Democratic congressman from New York, happened to see an NBC documentary about the incident in February 1969. Chemical and biological weapons were another side of the nuclear arms race, but they were a much more secret and hidden aspect of it. They weren't as widely discussed until Richard McCarthy made this a national issue. Before that point, chemical weapons were largely believed to be banned by international agreement. After World War I, in which every major power deployed chemical weapons, resulting in 1 million casualties and more than 900,000 deaths, Western nations signed the 1925 Geneva Protocol. The agreement prohibited the use of chemical and biological weapons, and for a time it seems as if that would be obeyed. But the US never signed that agreement. Between 1961 and 1969 alone, the US military spent $2 billion on its chemical weapons stockpile. Over that same period, the military dumped hundreds of thousands of tons of old weapons chemicals directly into the ocean, without bothering to keep records of precisely where or how many weapons were disposed of. The military also discovered multiple instances of chemicals leaking out of their containers, including 21,000 leaky bomb clusters discovered in the Rocky Mountain Arsenal in Denver. Yet the American public was almost entirely unaware of any of the stockpiles, or the danger of testing, storing, and transporting them. The only synthetic chemicals being discussed in the public sphere were pesticides harmful for the environment, like DDT, and so-called non-lethal chemicals used in Vietnam, like the herbicide Agent Orange and tear gas. This Agent Orange would later be discovered to be carcinogenic, resulting in a multitude of health problems for Vietnam veterans and residents of the country. After McCarthy saw the NBC piece on the Dugway sheep kill, he was determined to learn more and expose the chemical weapons complex to the rest of America. Beginning in May 1969, McCarthy instigated congressional hearings that revealed the extent of the U.S. chemical weapons program and uncovered a disposal program with a distasteful acronym, CHASE. It stood for the method by which toxic waste, moved onto ships and sent to sea, were disposed of. Cut holes and sink them. Ironically, tear gas has continued to be used as a weapon of pacification domestically. Law enforcement, from local police officers to the National Guard, have continued to use tear gas to quell riots and prevent property damage. But chemical weapons, which scientists of the 1960s and 70s described as emerging from Pandora's box, continue to haunt us. From their deadly use by dictator Bashar al-Assad on his own people in Syria, to Russia's apparent use of a nerve agent on former intelligence officials in the UK, it's clear that the use and the legacy of synthetic chemicals is far from over. A little more than a year after the Dugway incident, in July of 1969, a small leak developed in a nerve gas weapon on the U.S. military base on Okinawa. 24 people were injured, though none fatally. The press and the public quickly drew a line between Okinawa and the Utah sheep. More incidents came to light. The area surrounding the Dugway Proving Ground is intensely guarded. Everything that comes in and out is carefully monitored, guards are on constant patrol and actively armed, and the perimeter is lined with tall barbed wire fencing. There are even signs that authorize deadly force when necessary. While the base claims that its projects are now solely for the national defense, mysterious events near the facility continue. Most notably, a man went missing without a trace. On May 8, 2011, a local man named Joseph Bushling was driving away from Dugway at 4 a.m., though that is an ungodly hour to be driving. According to his friends, this was not unusual for Joseph. This fateful night, however, he didn't return. On the day of his disappearance, he left a strange voicemail for Herman Herrera, a former lieutenant of Special Operations. Quote, "It's Bushling, I need a ride. Alright, talk to you later." End quote. Herman said he called again after that, and that Joseph sounded frantic. His car was found empty about 65 miles away from the main entrance to Dugway a week later. His hat and shoes were also found nearby, but there was no sign of a body. There was no evidence of assault or that he had taken his own life. He simply vanished. As you might expect, this is alarming and rarely happens in investigations. Usually, you can work back using evidence at a scene. Once you find the victim, you can work backward and you can get solid answers. Authorities never had a victim to begin with, let alone a witness or a suspect. They simply couldn't find him or were coerced into conformity. Either way, the mystery continues. Dugway Proving Ground is so big, Rhode Island could have no problem relocating to it with room for more. Like most other similar facilities, it also is a place military personnel call home, with a northern area made up mostly of houses, schools, and places to eat and exercise, just like many other military bases around the globe. Dugway is divided into two parts. The Army operates in the northern portion, which houses most of the residents. The southeast portion is operated by the Air Force, with a runway large enough to land an aircraft the size of the Space Shuttle. This portion isn't mentioned on Dugway's website. This area has been developed and expanded since 2004 with an increased security buildup. Officials have not disclosed what this massive hunk of land is used for, and many speculate it's used for offensive military operations. But there's something missing. Something huge. Just before 9/11, $3 trillion, a quarter of the military's budget, went missing from the military's defense funds. Stephen Greer, a longtime skeptic of the Dugway program, says that this irregularity has been going on since World War II, when it would have been used to channel into funding secret operations like the Manhattan Project. Nowadays, the money could be going towards extraterrestrial or bioweapons research at Dugway instead. Others have more extreme theories about the true nature of these grounds. After all, where there are secret military operations, tight security, and bizarre experiments going on, UFO sightings are sure to follow. In the History Channel's UFO Hunters episode on Area 52, residents from Utah were interviewed on what they'd seen around the vast and shady military base on their desert doorsteps. A man with the fitting nickname Alien Dave claimed to have seen a plane disappear from the sky, discovered an underground fort on the side of one of the surrounding mountains, and even seen an electromagnetic beam blasting into space from the facility. Alien Dave isn't the only one. The most convincing evidence is that Lockheed Martin, one of the largest defense contractors in the world, former CEO Dr. Ben Rich, admitted on his deathbed that for years he had been working with a secret military operation, developing anti-gravity technology and flying saucers, powerful enough to take E.T. home. Quote, "We'd already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to even get them out of there to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." Dr. Rich admitted that earlier in his career he agreed that the public should not know about these secret programs. Late in his life, he concluded that the multinational corporate board of directors who were over this secret program posed more of a potential threat to the US than ETs or the technology they were developing. We may never know if this is a valid warning or a morphine-induced fever dream. What we do know is startling. When Edgar Mitchell, the former chief of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, requested a briefing on the secret Dugway aircraft program, he was denied the briefing based on a need-to-know basis. Furious after this rejection, Mitchell went on the record for a CNN interview in 2008 and said that indeed he was told, quote, "Sorry, Admiral, but you don't have the need to know. Goodbye," end quote. This is an interesting response, especially compared to other nations with allegedly similar UFO programs and investigations. Other countries have opened their UFO files completely, while the majority of US files have remained X-files, with extremely restricted access. I'm not really sure I believe the accusations of harboring alien life at the Dugway Proving Grounds, but through my research I've come to my own conclusion. The military needs to be held accountable for our missing tax dollars, and somehow prove to us that there isn't an enemy from within without compromising our national security. They should release files that have been in hiding all of these years. Viewing even a select few documents could prove the mystery of what exactly happens at the Dugway Proving Ground. Thanks for listening to the first episode of Crime and Cryptic. If you'd like to review source material, feel free to browse the episode description. Please be sure to follow us for more crime, conspiracy, and mystery content. You can follow us on Instagram at Crime and Cryptic. Be sure to leave a good review. It helps us provide consistent quality content. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay fresh.